little bit of time, but there's really no reason to delay, especially on your elevator, fire alarm, and security monitoring. That is low-hanging fruit for every department that has that because there's a solution in place. Go to your vendors and get it worked out. If you have telephony-centric use cases, we do want to maybe talk a little bit more to you because we want to be able to refer you to some potential resources for solutions. So that's why we also want to get your information. So we're also going to add you the information that you give us about your team members. We'll add you to a Teams channel to be able to share and collaborate on some information that's needed. If you have any questions from today's presentation, you can reach out to me. And again, take our questionnaire. I'm going to leave this up for just another second. And as soon as we hear back from you, we will start communicating with you and get you connected to the Teams channel so that you can start working on this effort. And next, we have got Bryce Benton.
Thank you, Lisa. And I will advance the slide. Hey, everybody, I'm Bryce, and thanks for being here, and thanks for listening to what I have to say, and hopefully we'll all come away with learning a little bit more about what I'm talking about, and all of us have some degree of experience with it, but this might be an invitation to find out a little bit more and see how this might impact your world or the people you work with or the people that you serve. So as I mentioned, my name is Bryce, and I'm a software engineer here at the Austin Public Library. Been here since 2012, and I do a lot of work on our website. We have a Drupal-based website that we use for content management, and we do a lot of things with this website, with the website. And we also have a lot of other services that may or may not have anything to do with the website, but the website ties together a lot of services. Sometimes they're vendor services that we make available. Sometimes they're features or services that we have made ourselves and we make those available, and everywhere in between. So we have all these things, and of course we want people to use them, and we want people to use them well and in appropriate ways. And one of the ways that we can encourage people to use our services well is through documentation. And you might have some experience with documentation. I will confess that it's usually from me begrudgingly written, if at all. It's not very motivating for me to write documentation if I feel like no one will read it, or, what's the point? Or I'm just too busy, or there's a million excuses. But on the other hand, I really do like it when I have documentation, whether someone else wrote it or whether I've written it myself. It's very helpful. And so another way we can think about documentation is kind of like translation. So AI is really good at translating language, let's say from English to Spanish. But what I'll show you today is that it's also really good for translating services into documents in the form of documentation. And I'll give you a little taste about how we're doing that and give you some ideas about how you might be able to do that. So I mentioned AI, and when I say AI, I really mean large language models. So that means ChatGPT. I'll also be talking about Claude AI. It's made by a company called Anthropic. So we'll be using those technologies with two other technologies that you might have heard of, but I'll give you a little glimpse of what those are too, namely the US Web Design System, or sometimes called USWDS, and also GitHub. So briefly put, the US Web Design System is a set of best practices, components, widgets, things that you could put on a website like buttons, and recommendations for how to make headlines and bulleted lists and just how to make things look consistent. But really what the value is also, which I would introduce to you if you hadn't thought about it in this way already, is that it really seeks to make services understandable and for the widest range of people and backgrounds also. So Yes, there are some specific code that they recommend, such as HTML and CSS and sometimes JavaScript. But really, it's the vibe. It's the gist of what they're going for that we're trying to get to, namely consistency and the welcoming language, using consistent tone that makes people feel that it's okay to continue learning. And another thing I'll be showing is GitHub, and you might be using it. And in that case, you might learn something that you haven't tried already that might take it a little further. Or, a lot of people might be a little bit scared to even approach GitHub because there's a lot of developers around, or it might seem like, oh, that's something that's so technical, it's not for me. But I'll also show you some ways that just using copy and paste, like really simple technologies you can use and things that you already know how to do, you can utilize GitHub to take what you're doing even further. So we're almost to the demo time where it gets fun, but just quickly said, we can use AI, different AI. It might be OpenAI's ChatGPT or Claude AI or something that comes in the future. We might specialize it, or we might use something that's just more general purpose, but we can use these tools to generate text. But it's not just text. It could be, images or video, but it's not just that either. The point is we can help generate understanding and depth of meaning. And that's also what documentation seeks to do. It seeks to translate it in a way that's understandable. And anybody that's been to IKEA will recall the pamphlet that they give. And a lot of times they don't even use English; they just use pictures. So what we're trying to do, it's related to language, but it's also more the point of language, which is communication and understanding. So now let me show you what that looks like and show you some examples of what I've been doing with it. And as I'm showing you, I just would like for you to think about how you might do it. So now I'm gladly receive your applause and I want to look good, but really what I'm trying to do is put these ideas in your head so that you can do it things that are relevant to you or your department or the people that you serve. So let me stop sharing this real quick, and I'm going to switch into sharing my screen in a different way. So hang on just a second. Okay, can y'all see me? Hopefully it's kicking in. Great. Okay. So what we're looking at right here on the left side is Claude AI, and this is very similar, almost exactly like ChatGPT, but it's not as popular or like a lot of people haven't even heard of it, but it's pretty good. They just came out with a new version, and that's what we'll be demonstrating today. This is the paid version. I have my own private account that I paid for. That gives me access to the latest features. And since I'm doing a demonstration, I want to show, best foot forward. So I've already typed in this, I just typed that, and that essentially sets the context of what we're going to try to do. It sets some parameters. We want to kind of tap into the US web design system best practices. Now, we don't even have to know what those best practices are. We're just mentioning them, and it will kind of look those up itself and kind of see what's relevant. And so what we're going to do is write some documentation for a service here at the library. And namely, we provide the hours for our innovation lab. It's just one little tiny service that the library does. What are the hours for the innovation lab? So if I hit enter, it'll start processing that. And notice that I also asked it, generate some questions for me to answer. So it's going to think about what it needs to know to ask me. I'm going to tell it, and then it's going to make the documentation. So I hit enter. It's already working on it. So this is real time. I just hit the button right now. So who's the primary audience for this documentation? Well, so cheat sheet, I already did this previously. So pretend like I'm typing this in. The purpose of this documentation is to explain where to go and what's needed. So this is okay, pretend like I typed that in. Well, it asked me the next question. Well, I answered that. And it's asking me a series of questions, and I happen to know the answer, so I'm a perfect person for it to be interviewing. And I was involved in making the system, so I'm a great person to interview to write the documentation. But I haven't yet, so better late than never. So I continue to answer a few more questions, and then it's asking me a little bit more. It's like I sometimes had to go look this up and fill it in, but it's essentially just copying and pasting text or typing text. You could also use voice dictation, but essentially we're getting things ready. Another thing you could do is copy an entire web page, paste it in. It can handle it no problem. So last thing I just said, keep in mind that there might be some caching that makes it seem like it's finished yet, just something that I happen to know that I might want to issue as a reminder. So it did all that. It's processing it. And then I asked it for text that then I can use to make a document. And that is what this is. But one tip that I'd like to point out is that if it puts it in this type of box, it's way easier to copy. So I actually want that all of this to be in this type of box. So that's why I said, okay, but I truly need this entire thing in copyable markdown format. And just as a side note, markdown is a way, it's kind of like HTML. It's a quick way of structuring text. So if you need to make headlines or a bulleted list, it does that really fast. So even though I asked for it to do it in markdown format, the browser is interpreting the markdown format. Oops. So I'm illustrating that this is amazing, but sometimes you kind of have to ask it more than once. So I already asked it. No, the browser keeps interpreting the markdown. Please, you might have to beg it. Please put this into a section so that I could easily copy it. Okay, it's getting closer. So this is what markdown looks like. This makes a headline. This makes a H2 or a secondary headline. So this is what I want. I'm trying to create a document that is structured in a way that is easily understandable and easily copyable. Oops, it busted out of that again. So I had to ask it literally 4 or 5 times. And I even had to suggest, you might need to break it up into more than one section. So because it was so complicated and because it included some other types of markup, it's like 2 layers of markup, got a little bit confused. But when I finally asked it in a way that it can kind of deal with, it did actually present 2 sections. And so I could easily copy those somewhere else. So quickly said, I've got this repository open in GitHub. And if you're not familiar with GitHub, it's a way of doing version control, which is kind of like track changes, and it facilitates collaboration across time and with many people. You can rewind to a previous state if something breaks, or people can work on things in parallel and then merge it back together. But this is very helpful even for your own purposes. You might be working on a draft and you just want to, keep iterating it and moving it forward. But one of the things that you can use GitHub for is just to host files, and that's what we'll be doing here. So I'm in this repository, which I've already started, and then I'm going to create a new file. And then back on this screen, I've got this document ready. I copied that code, and then over here, I just paste that in. Oops, did it not copy it? Oh, there it is. So do you see how I copied that over and then now it's in here? Well, if I give that a good file name, it'll also make a good preview. So let me do that too. Not letting me, it won't let me click in there. Sorry about that. Okay, it needs to have a file name with MD at the end. I don't know why it's not, this whole browser is stuck. Okay, the demo gods, you know how they are. So the browser is not cooperating. Okay, so if you put this in GitHub and it's in MD or Markdown format, it expands that out and it makes it look like headlines. It makes it look like bulleted lists. And unfortunately, the demo is not cooperating. But also want to show you back on the AI mode is that so the first documentation that I added was more for the general public or people that just might be using the service. But sometimes documentation also might be for yourself or a fellow engineer, and it's more technical. So in this case, what I've done is I've pasted in a whole bunch of JavaScript, and this JavaScript is over 1,000 lines long. It's so long that it can't even put it on the page, so it kind of encapsulates it there. And I've asked it to explain what this JavaScript does, and it took about maybe 10 seconds, not very long, but it explained it very, very well. It interpreted the code. I didn't say anything. All I did was just paste it in. So, on the first example, I told it, ask me questions, but on this case, I just, let's just see what it comes up with on its own. And it did a very good job. It explains that, it's very complex. So pretending that the GitHub demo is working, what I might do is copy this from here over to GitHub, and then I can save it. And then if I need to iterate it or edit it or share it with other people, I've got something that we can run with. But, while I was still on here, I thought, well, let me just go ahead and ask it some questions. So, and this is my point, is it's very capable of generating that markdown formatted text, but it's also good at understanding what we're even talking about. So in this case, I said if I wanted to add a new room to the Ruiz branch, which is, a task that I have to do soon, how would I do that? Well, from looking at that code, it knows the answer. And I can tell you from looking through this, this is the right answer. This is exactly what I need to do to go in and fix that code. It has some things to keep in mind. Some things, well, make sure that you line this up and okay, well, make sure that's working. It's like, this is incredible. So what that it means is also this is where we're headed. So if we would take the time to do good documentation, we can get to places where we can answer really sophisticated questions just like that. So truly amazing. So one quick thing I also wanted just to quickly demonstrate is ChatGPT, which is a little bit more famous. You've probably heard of it, maybe more so than Claude AI, which I was just demonstrating. But specifically, I wanted to show you that I've created a custom GPT, sometimes called GPTs. And so, I used GPT, or excuse me, Chat GPT to make it. And then it's kind of like a sub-specialized GPT that I can use. So in this case, I gave it a name, cool name, Documentor, which I will confess, I also got help from the AI to help me think of that name. It actually thought of it, but it also thought of 5 others I didn't like. So I chose this was the best one. Um, so this is already mentions that we're going to always kind of refer to USWDS. It mentions that we want to be, inclusive and engaging. It happens to mention if there's opportunities to throw in humor, that's always welcome. And so point being is that you can specialize or not, and you can customize or not, and you can iterate, and it's okay. And you can kind of get halfway there and the rest of the way later. But what we're essentially trying to do is take something that's really complex, or maybe it's stuck in somebody's head, like myself, and get it out on paper, get it just in one place, and let the AI kind of work on it, maybe ask you some questions to kind of continue working on it, and then come up with a document, ideally in some kind of way that's translatable into, as I said, markdown format, or you might have something else that works well for you, but something that's kind of like we can build on this. Like a milestone, or if you think about like a giant, here at the library, we have a set of stairs. Well, the stairs have landings, and it would be impossible to go all the way to the sixth floor without having taken some breaks. So you can think about even this documentation or different versions as a little bit of a, okay, we got to a point where we can understand this, and then later if we need to change it, we can, and that's okay. So having said all that, the last thing I was just going to mention was that we're using GitHub to with a lot of facility, in the sense that GitHub really makes collaboration unlimited. I mean, you could collaborate with internal people, you could collaborate with yourself, you can collaborate with any kind of combination. And of course, that takes some nuanced permission setting to make sure that the right people have permission to edit files, whereas other people may not need those. Um, and that's something that you or yourself or your department would need to work out. But I'm telling you that GitHub has all those and they do a really good job with it. And you could use the web interface, or they also have applications for your phone or computer. The city has an enterprise GitHub account, which you may be using already, or you might want to avail yourself of it. Um, Mostly today, I've been talking about the public, just the regular GitHub. So, there's some choices that you would need to make to see, what's appropriate, what we need to be like behind some wall, strictly on the city side, maybe on the enterprise GitHub. But there's a lot of things that we really ought to consider putting on the public side of GitHub. And again, that doesn't mean that just anybody can come and edit them, but you can assign specific people or specific roles, and that's all very well managed. Um, so just a couple things that I wanted to mention that you might not be aware of that GitHub offers and that we're using is there's different ways to organize within GitHub. And so speaking of organize, you can create what's called an organization, and that's what we did for the APL Innovation Lab. So that's somewhat of an umbrella, and then under the APL Innovation Lab, we can have as many as we want of specific repositories. So some of those repos are private and just for, our use, just, for ourselves. And then many of them, ideally, many of them are public. So we're planning to use this to help engage the public to find out more about our services, but especially for volunteers and especially like high level, high functioning or very skilled volunteers. So it's a goal of ours to engage as many people as come around that want to help, that we can put them to work, and not just for shelving books or things that literally just almost anybody could do. We're trying to look for really deep levels of engagement and opportunities for education, and ideally in a way that's not just a one-off that somebody just learns about something and then just goes off on their merry way. If we can find a way to create a process by which we can benefit from the things that they learn, or that they can contribute either to the documentation or the service themselves itself, then that's a wonderful community that we're cultivating. So I've said a lot and I've touched on a lot of different things, and I got really excited talking about it. But hopefully, what I've mentioned gives you something that you can run with or experiment with. And I would invite you, even if you're using the free version, you don't have to get the paid version, just to see what you can do, just to try to move some text from A to B, with a little bit of flavor. Um, when they first came out, people were doing all kinds of fun stuff, writing limericks or I don't know what. And I wasn't that impressed, or I just didn't appeal to me. Like, who cares? Like, I don't want to write things that nobody reads, or I don't care about some silly joke. But this was really, it kind of lit a fire under me. And so I'm hoping that you might see a way to use this tool to really superpower what you're already doing. And it's not that it's taking over, it's more that it's empowering you. So you have different needs than the library, but we all have the need of communicating and trying to help make our systems as resilient and robust and engaging as possible. And I'll stop now, but if we have questions, you're welcome to ask me here or subsequently. My name is Bryce Benton, and you can find me at the library. And thanks for listening. So I'll start planning to transfer the